Well, welcome everybody back to the Sean Trey Show. I've got a really interesting guest with me today, and would you like to tell people who you are and a little bit about what you do?
My name's Tom Morgan. I am the founder of a community called The Leading Edge.
Now, what caused you to form this community?
I was on Wall Street for about 20 years, and I'd say, long story short, I realized that there's an enormous void where midlife transition opportunities should be. That if you're a type A person with a unique set of skills, and you hit a point where the niche that you're in either stops being exciting, or you're just dying a little bit inside. There aren't really many ways to help reinvent yourself, and I realized that even some quite high performing people found themselves in that situation a lot. And there are really very, very scant resources, and rather than offer people a defined method, which goes into cult territory quite quickly. I wanted to create a community so people with similar backgrounds could explore these in kind of an open and supportive environment.
That's awesome. It's interesting because, right now we are seeing in many different industries with the rise of AI and things that people are looking at their career shifting, and people are looking at different directions, and yet some people don't have a clear idea of how to move forward. And it's like the resources are not so easy. We have hear people that share their own stories, but yet how do you find the people that are that one quote that they say that every person is the kind of the, I don't know, the culmination of the five people that you interact with. And so if you have five people around you that have had an experience that is interesting or powerful, then you can connect to that. But if you don't have that community, you feel lost at times.
But what's worse, I think, is if you've outgrown the community that is the five chimps, right? Like
Ooh.
the way I saw things was through the model of this British neurologist called Ian McGilchrist, and he did this pioneering work on the brain's hemispheres that completely changed my life and my perception of the world. And effectively, to massively oversimplify it, your brain's left hemisphere is narrow, linear, logical, kind of quote unquote high IQ, and is excellent at pursuing things. And people with very, very finely developed left hemispheres tend to find themselves in industries that focus on abstractions, finance, tech, moving things around in your head. And that same skill set is woefully inadequate when it comes to working out what you want to do next. That requires a kind of much broader situational awareness that typically comes out of the right hemisphere. And what's interesting about the right hemisphere is it's emotional, somatic, non-logical, and almost entirely non-verbal. So when you hit the end of the line, you're going to be feeling a lot of things, but they won't feel logical. They'll be in your body. They'll be emotional. They'll be, those are often facets of your character that you've been trained to repress in order so that you can succeed. And it often requires faith, a word that's toxic to most rational people,
Right.
because they need to make steps that have no obvious payoff and move into careers that have no obvious trajectory or destination in mind. And it's extra bad for people in high achieving professions because, one, they tend to have high outgoings or high expectations of themselves, or live in crushingly expensive cities. And then they need to move to a form of cognition that they probably haven't cultivated in any meaningful way. And there's some sort of weird neurological quirks that the left hemisphere is competitive with the right, and it lies when it doesn't understand something. And the left and the right is not competitive with the left. So you have this huge, often existential struggle between the left hemisphere that just simply will not give the steering wheel to the right. And that creates an enormous amount of pain and suffering.
That's so interesting. Wow. I need to look up these studies. Can you give me any examples of people that were, or maybe not specific examples, but what are some case studies, just stories about people that have kind of gone through this?
Yeah, I mean, I'll tell you one that's top of mind. I actually wrote about it a few weeks ago, but I knew a lovely, lovely Scotsman who found me as a result of my work, and he'd worked in hospitality earlier in his life. He'd been a waiter, and then he went back to school, and he managed to get a job at one of the leading fund managers in Scotland. And
Wow.
to his friends, he'd really won the lottery, and it was generating an enormous amount of personal dissonance, such that within a few months he was spending most of his time hiding in the toilet. It was just very, very at odds with the person that he was. He was an excellent writer. And we spoke for months, actually years, more than a year. And I had this strange intuition that when people summon the courage to cross the threshold out of a place that's bad for them, the universe winks at them almost immediately. And I said to him, the universe is going to wink. And within 48 hours, he'd been offered something close to his dream job, writing for a publication that, in his own words, had him singing in the key of me again. And he sent an email back to his old firm, basically saying, I promised myself I'd never get stuck in the machine. And he said he received a not insubstantial number of replies, even from quite young people, who, found his exit really quite inspiring. But it was this idea that he had to make this kind of clean break. And once he did, and he returned to the person that he was supposed to become, which was an excellent writer, there was a big response from reality around him.
I love that. I love the whole concept of the universe winks at you. I remember that there was this moment that for my wife, that she's a singer in Vietnam, and she was having this existential crisis of like, what am I doing with my career? What do I want to be doing? What type of music am I making? Even she's like, well, where do I see myself in 5, 10, 15, 20 years with this? And so I just was like, you know what? Let's go to this one place. It's this place that was always special to me. Just go out there, clear our heads, and see what happens. And I said that, and then 2 months passed, and we didn't go. And then finally, one night, I was looking at her. I was like, let's go to that place. I had that idea. Let's go do that tonight. We went there, and it was the Notre Dame Cathedral right in the center of Saigon. That is a place that people will go and just kind of think, pray and center. And we got there, and my wife's just centering, and she's deep in her thoughts, and she turns and looks to her right, and not more than a few meters away is Kanli, who is essentially the greatest diva this country has ever known. And she's sitting there, and my wife looks over and she's like, oh my goodness, that's Can Lee. This is my mom's idol. This is someone I grew up with. She's the icon of Vietnamese music. And she went over, and my wife was like, I just want to introduce myself. My name is V. I'm the singer. I just want to say I've always looked up and respected you. And she looked at my wife and she said, of course I know who you are. And I just want to say that I've always been inspiring to me with the type of music you sing and how honest you are to yourself. And it was just like all of these validations from this person that my wife had looked up to her entire life just poured into her at that moment. And it was like my wife described it in a way of like the universe was just saying, okay, here you go. And it was like, it was this wink. And it's like, but it takes a willingness to step through a door, to be ready to go down a path and be willing to say, can I embrace what is my calling? Because for each of us, what was it? There was the Japanese concept of ikigai is something that I'm absolutely in love with. And it's like, I could be the best doctor in the world, or maybe I could be the best lawyer, but maybe that's not my calling. Maybe I am this over here. And you have to figure out what that is for you. I was really respected my dad. He worked in business and marketing. And then later on, he had this realization that he wanted to help people, nurture people. So he went and studied massage. And then he started running a massage school. And it was this thing that gave him purpose. And he's still doing it. He's 80 and he still runs this massage school because he found his purpose at some point. And it was just this beautiful thing.
Mm. Yeah, I find that I obviously spent years and years and years studying transitional career paths and all the models and ikigai and all this stuff. And it didn't help me because I was so cut off from myself.
Oh, wow.
And I think that I did everything wrong. I mean, all my expertise comes from profound mistakes. And I'd worked in finance. I'd been good at certain aspects of finance, but once I had a spiritual experience sitting at my desk in 2017, I realized that I had to get out of finance immediately and go and do something quote unquote meaningful with my life, service, So I quit. I tried to work in hospice for 4 months. I went back to Fordham to study social work. I tried to be a recruiter to help people shift their jobs. I thought I might be a Jungian analyst. I panicked and went back into finance for a year. That nearly killed me. And basically, I realized that I was trying to brute force meaning, that I knew that the second half of life needed to be meaningful, but I was letting my sort of left hemisphere decide what meaning was. This is because I didn't have an understanding of the concept of the wing. To step back for a second and maybe overcomplicate things, this concept that helped me understand things in kind of quote unquote scientific terms, that the universe trends towards complexity. And the definition of complexity is almost like a paradox. It's something that's highly differentiated and something that's highly integrated. So your body has how many different parts? 10,000? I don't know. Like, how many different things can you point to in your body? All of them are self-contained. The cells are self-contained. Your liver is self-contained. Your kidneys are self-contained. They all do their own little thing, but they all work together in total integration to such an extent that you have no idea what your gallbladder is doing right now, right? So you are the finest example, well, probably one of the finest examples in the universe of a completely differentiated and integrated complex entity. Now, a lot of people assume that process ends at the edges of our skin, and we are ourselves not participants in a similar kind of dance. And I think that's not true. But that means you have to embrace one idea, which is differentiation. What is it that Sean can do? What is it that is play to me and work to others? What puts me in flow? That's the differentiation, something that you can pursue forever and not really get bored, or pursue for a really long time and not get bored. That's hard to find, particularly if you're emotionally or physically disconnected, but it's not impossible. The harder part is the integration, which requires you to be a little bit woo, which is the idea that you're going to get signals back from your quote unquote exterior environment when you find that right thing. And that requires a lot of trial and error, and it requires a lot of faith. It is that wink from the universe. I leaped a lot, but I was leaping into the wrong thing. And it was actually like, once I came out the other side of a dark night of the soul, 2 years of hell later, I started writing, which was always the thing that I liked to do, and speaking about stuff that was relevant to my own experience in finance, using the skills I'd acquired in finance to an audience in finance. And once I did that, the universe was like, here, have a dream job. Yeah, for 3 years, I was paid handsomely to write about these topics for a finance audience. And now I run my own community doing the same thing, right? But it was the universe was like, oh, thank God, you moron. Like, I've been trying to like, and up until that point, I'd be like, no one's going to pay me to write on the internet, right? No one gets paid to write on the internet, particularly about finance and spirituality. When I actually just did it and put it out into the world, I was paid exactly what I needed to live. And the doors have done nothing but open ever since. But it's the idea that you live in a responsive reality that's been the biggest unlock of any aspect of my life, even though it sounds a little bit weird and mystical to most normal people.
Speaking my language. I love to hear this. Let me ask you this. If someone is in the dark night of their soul, what do you recommend they do? How do you recommend someone's journey on this path to finding their meaning?
I'm not sure there's much you can do once you're in it. Genuinely not sure. I think maybe you just have to burn for a little while. I think you have to know that it ends. I think there's a trajectory of the hero's journey that speaks to what that speaks to what the dark night of the soul is. I'm interested in, look at the Matrix, right? The Matrix is the clearest narrative representation of the hero's journey that we've had in probably 50 years. Thomas Anderson's stuck at his desk before he becomes Neo, and he's got this grind every day, and this dissonance in his head, this question, what is the Matrix, that plays over and over again. And that's the guy who's sitting in his cubicle in finance or law or whatever, just thinking, shit, is this all there is? Is
Right.
this all there is? And then there's the call to adventure, which is, you know what? Suddenly I'm interested in Joseph Campbell or Carl Jung or singing or teaching or whatever it is, right? But there's no future there. So you refuse to call. Neo learns about the Matrix, then goes back to his job.
Right.
Then there's the crisis, right? Because this is emotional, somatic, it's non-verbal, it's non-logical, you refuse to call, because why are you going to risk it? And unfortunately, evolution punishes stasis more than anything else. So you will either die refusing the call, or there will be a crisis. For me, it was physical and mental breakdown, that I was sitting at this desk with everything I needed, and I was gaining weight and going crazy. And then you have the choice of crossing the threshold. And once you cross the threshold, you go into chaos. You encounter and try and integrate all the things that were keeping you stuck in the first place. And that often leads to a dark night of the soul, as it is to me, when you realize reality doesn't work the way you thought it did. And the left hemisphere isn't necessarily in control. And you do have to surrender to forces you can't understand initially and probably never will. And then you emerge at a higher level of complexity. Then you become integrated. Then you move from Neo to the One. You're an integrated human being. During that period of death and rebirth, I'm not sure how much you can help people. But to be mega, mega practical, I've spent a few years studying and coaching this. And the one thing that seems to work more often than not is the idea of tiny experiments, made famous by a lovely neuroscientist called Dr. Anne-Laure Lecomte, which is essentially, if you can work out what the differentiation is, the thing that brings you alive, find ways of getting it out into the world, whether it's a newsletter, a podcast like you're doing, a song you want to record, find ways of putting it out into the world. And it always has to be in service of others, yourself and others. It's not self-sacrifice, it's service. Very critical distinction that I screwed up. I thought it was self-sacrifice, that I shouldn't enjoy these things that I was doing because I needed to serve. It's not true. It is, you are part of everything, so you should be enjoying this process. And when you find that point of differentiation, integration, and put it out there, ideally with some personal vulnerability, you might get the synchronicity back. When you get that synchronicity back, you know it's the right thing.
I love the Matrix. I love the hero's journey. And I think about there's so many great movies that tap into the hero's journey. One of my favorites has always been Star Wars. Luke is sitting there, and it's interesting because so often when we refuse, think about it. If Luke had have stayed at his home, in the Star Wars, like 2 seconds later, they killed everyone, we get stuck. Last night, I was sitting at home, and I was in this place of my own stuckness. And all of a sudden, my wife was singing across town, and it was really far. I was 20 kilometers away, and there's no taxis out tonight. And I was like, I don't know those roads, but I was like, you know what? I want to come see you sing. My daughter's with her grandma, and I'd love to come over. So I hop on a motorcycle taxi. Takes me 20 kilometers across town. It was an hour ride, and I ride myself, but it was very much a place and part of town I did not know. And it was an adventure. And, and I sat there, and one of the things too, is I sat before I went, there was this part of me that was like, don't go, just stay with the known, stay with the safe, stay with the stable. But when you do those things, it might feel safe, it might feel stable, but at the end of the day, you're slowly suffocating, in this place. At least that's what I feel like. And when I was on the back of that motorbike, and I'm just journeying from the known into the unknown, even if it's one little journey, there were places that I had never seen. The smells were more real. The things, the colors were shining. And I looked, and I was just like, there it is. There's that spark of stepping into the unknown. And for me, you're so right. And for people who haven't done this, when I first moved to Vietnam, there were, it was just like the hero's journey. It was journeying from the known into the unknown. And then there were the helpers that came. These people came, and it was like almost magic. I remember the day I met my wife. I was sitting at home, and I had met this guy who was a music producer. And I just felt like, you know what, today I need to go out of the house. I need to go see that guy. I called him, go see him. And I get there, and he's at the music studio, and he's just sitting there, and he's like, I'm going to go smoke a cigar in the hallway. And I was like, well, that's going to take a while. He's like, just wait for me. And then he jumped on his phone, and he just started calling people. And I was just like sitting there, and I'm like, well, I'm already here. And I heard this magical music coming from the next room. And I said, well, what is that? So I peeked in, and there was this singer recording this amazing album. That was my wife. And that night, I didn't even say hi to her. She just left, and I was just like, that was great. But then I bumped into her 2 days later, and I was just like, okay. And then I got her information from my friend. I messaged her. But it was that wink, that pull, that willingness on my part to step out into the unknown and to let things get messy and a little scary at times, but yet when you step into that, the universe winks. And I love the hero's journey as well, because when you journey, when these characters, whatever world it might be, and there's a great one if you're into sci-fi, the my daughter and I just dove into it. I'm a big Star Wars fan, and the Skeleton crew is so good. It is it is like the Goonies in space, the Goonies in Star Wars land. And it's phenomenal. And you have these kids in their normal life. And then this event happens that rockets them into this world of change, a world where all of them are forced to find themselves, find their core, and to find who they really are. And that's the beauty of that hero's journey, is that to get to the other side, you have to figure out, what's meaningful to you. For me, this podcast was part of my journey, finding a way of service to help people, to speak to people. And I have this podcast that is about personal betterment, but I also have a podcast that's about personal finance that I talk to people about. And the reason I did that was because I knew nothing about personal finance. I grew up with like zero financial education. And I was like, you know what? I need to help people like me that are absolute idiots about this, ask these stupid questions. But again, it came from a place of service, that I just was like, I want to get this information out there so that other people can have that. And what I noticed is that the doors started to open when I started to do that.
Well, follow your bliss. Doors will open where there were only walls. But I need to back up for a second and talk about how Xeon are by far the best way of traveling around any city. The number of times I had more than 10 beer hoy and found myself on the back of a motorbike going across town with the smells and sights and the wood smoke. Being on the back of a motorbike taxi is something I really, really miss, and wish it was something I could bring to Manhattan, although I'd be dead in 2 minutes. The thing, when Neo gets told about the Matrix, he gets told by Trinity. When Luke gets pulled off Tatooine, it's by Leia. There's this idea of the anima, of love. You don't have to shoot out in every possible direction, because the world is too complicated for that. The world is full of too many things. One of my favorite movies is Interstellar.
Which such a great movie.
Yeah. Well, the message of that is actually much, much, much smarter than I think people give it credit for, because the ending's a bit clunky. But essentially, there's a point in the movie where Matthew McConaughey is talking to Anne Hathaway, and he talks about how love means more than just pair bonding and social function, and that love is in itself a guide, and it actually ends up being the guide of where they should go. Her love for her dead partner Edmonds, it operates across space and time. And from a profoundly practical basis, Anla and my friend Devon Martin, who's one of the best coaches I've ever met, they both talk about this idea of keeping an energy diary. So what you do is for a couple of weeks, you monitor your energy levels when you do everything. You become what she calls an anthropologist of your own life. And you just track what brings you up and what pulls you down. what people bring you up and pull you down, what actions bring you up and pull you down, then you start to get this right hemispheric sensitivity to the world around you. And, you were pulled across town by love for your wife. You were
Yeah.
pulled into Vietnam by love. When you look back, all of this stuff makes sense. It isn't random. It's
No.
love. You're pulled towards certain things by love. And love is, like whatever it is, Ang-Yo-Em, right? Like there's
Yeah.
a lot of different ways to say love, and Sanskrit has 96
Wow.
words for love, and English has one. And the impoverishment with which we understand the word love is something that I write about continuously, because I'm like, we don't understand that this is a primal force of the universe, perhaps the force of the universe, perhaps what that pull to complexity and wholeness feels like. And when we tune into that sense, as I just said, follow your bliss and doors will open where there were only walls. Doesn't mean just do whatever you want. It means follow integrated love and the doors will open.
I love that. There was I told my wife, I've told her 1,000 times that I felt like our daughter pulled me back here. And like it was just this thing that there was this, because time's relative, and we exist so much beyond that, and I think that love, like you said, is this force of deep magic, and probably something that we might never understand. But Interstellar, you know, that movie is powerful on so many levels. I sit there and watch that, and I think about the love that I have for my daughter is one of the forces that motivates me in all aspects of my life, and it's one of the things that the the core reason I started my podcast was something else. The core reason I started my podcast was that I love my parents, and I wish that I could have spoken to them at this age. Now when I speak to them, they're tired, and it's harder for them to have long conversations about things. But I created this podcast, so hopefully someday my daughter can watch these conversations and go, wow, that's powerful. I'm so glad that dad shared and had that conversation with someone, and maybe other people. We don't see all of the people whose lives that we're touching. I taught for a long time, and years passed. I taught this one kid and forgot about him. 15 years later, I got this message. Hey, are you Sean that used to teach at this school? And I was like, yeah, that's me. And he's like, I just wanted to send you a letter. I've been trying to find you for a long time, and I just wanted to tell you about the impact that you had on my life. You taught me to dream bigger. You taught me to think. You taught me to ask questions. And I just like, I didn't know I did all that, man. But it was the impact that I had, and it was because I remember this kid though, and he was a weird kid, and I treated him with respect. And I was like, you know what? I like you. You're a fun human being, and never change. And the other kids were really judgmental of him because he was so weird. And I was like, you know what? I'm weird too. Be okay with that. And he says my weirdness got me into good places. It let me become an artist. I felt safe channeling these emotions that I had inside onto canvas, and it made me feel awesome that I was the conduit for this person's transformation. I was that helper that appeared when this person was stepping into their journey, and that made me feel good.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how many people like that you need to make it a life well lived, right?
Right?
Like, I don't have a huge platform, but I now have enough emails and messages I've received to pay for a wall of this room. And if I'm feeling either really depressed or really arrogant, one day I'm going to do it, right? Like I'm going to put up all the emails I received of people who told me that they didn't kill themselves or it changed their life. And no one ever sent me anything like that when I spent 20 years on Wall Street. Ever, once. They were like, oh, maybe you gave me a good stock idea, but no one ever said that I had any impact. But I think there's another point that I think about all the time, which you've raised, which is that everyone knows what the butterfly effect is, right?
Yeah.
And yet we still look for big impact. We still want to have, I mean, I still want to have like a million followers on Substack, right? I still want a million people to be reading my work, but deep down, I know reality doesn't work that way, right? It's that if you change that one kid's life and he becomes an artist, and that art touches 5 people, but those 5 people touch a million people,
Yeah.
you then understand that it's non-linear and cascading. And that's helped me let go of the idea that I have to be having this major impact. Because I think if you try and brute force things, it can go wrong. You know, one of my favorite, and that's how the left hemisphere thinks. It's looking for a bigger lever. You know, one of my favorite examples is, you know, not that far away from you in China, where Mao noticed that the sparrows were eating the grain reserves. And so he tried to solve the problem by telling the population to kill all the sparrows, which, it being communist China, they did quite effectively. So they would clap pots and pans to exhaust the sparrows so that they would eventually come to the earth where they would be killed. And then a locust infestation came in, and there were no sparrows to eat the locusts. And there was a famine that killed 50 million people. It's the worst man-made disaster in history, all because someone tried to control one variable of a complex adaptive system with brute force. And that's what the left hemisphere does to your life. It's what the left hemisphere is doing to the world. It's trying to control things it doesn't understand. And sometimes you have to let that impulse go and just act in integrity. And when you do, you don't know what the impact is going to be, but the chances of someone calling you up 10 years later and being, you changed my life, you put that chance on the table.
I love that. Well, yeah, I think that there is this long dance. I love the speech by Steve Jobs where he is at Stanford and he's talking about you cannot connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect them looking back. And he gives such a beautiful story about how a random class that he took at university on type fonts and you know and scripts was the thing that allowed him to sit there when Apple was getting created to go, let's have nice fonts on this computer. And it's fascinating that you know you can't see it, and we try to plan our way forward, and you know, like you said, that's the left brain. It just wants to analyze, it wants to break it down. But then, you know, when I came back to Vietnam, I had this plan. But it like literally everything about me coming back here was about my entire world falling apart until it fell into place. Everything was going this way and that way. And I had a job offer to come back, and then I didn't take it. And then everything fell apart. And then I was like, well, I have to come back here. And like, it was the thing that I was just like, well, then once I stepped through that door, like you said, everything fell into place. And so I love this. And I think that if in my own life, I have to remember to look for the universe winking at me more often.
There's a lovely word called pronoia, which is that the universe is conspiring in your favor. So it's like the opposite of paranoia.
I've never heard that. Talk to me about that.
It just means it just means that get used to expecting that everything's conspiring in your favor. You know, I've spent a lot of time looking at like mystical woo spiritual ideas for the last sort of 3 or 4 years as I've been drawn further and further away from traditional finance. And I think people can get kind of wrapped up in their head with the spiritual practice of the day. Yeah. And I've come to believe that actually the most effective spiritual practice is just to pay unbelievably close attention to what's going on around you, because the universe is conspiring in your favor. The most bonkers idea that I'm increasingly believing to be true, due to some really unexpected mystical sources, is this concept of Earth School. That effectively, before we incarnate, our soul or our higher self, or whatever you want to call it, chooses a series of lessons for us to learn that can be specifically reversing karma from a previous incarnation, or getting an array of experiences, all of which are designed to make us more open and loving. And those experiences can be really, really horrible, or they can be really, really amazing. But the idea is that friction creates growth. And I've come to actually believe that this is probably true, like not just a metaphor, that this is actually probably true. And the reason why it's so helpful is that every time anything bad happens, you're like, I kind of hate the expression everything happens for a reason. I prefer everything happens for a reason, and it's your job to find the reason, right? That, like, I got a piece of bad news on Friday, and it knocked me off my center for about an hour. And I think previously it would have knocked me off my center and made me really angry and bitter for days or weeks. But now I'm like, oh, there's something here. This is going to go in a different direction, and I don't know what that direction is. There's a line from Cormac McCarthy, which is, you never know what worse luck your bad luck saved you from. Right.
Yeah.
Like,
Yes.
right. And so I'm just like, really haven't had any real terrible adversity yet. But the little knocks don't bother me as much, because I know that there's some sort of plan, and my God, I may have even devised a plan myself.